My Lords, I'm rising to support Amendments 13 and 28, which I've put my name to. In general, I support any amendments in any of the groups coming up that aim to strengthen or extend or deepen the Bill's duty to academic freedom and free speech, and that give some ballast to seeing free speech as not extraneous to the purpose of universities, but core to their mission. The key point in Amendment 13 for me is that it notes the nature of the speech as covering political, philosophical and academic nature of speech, and speech of a political nature includes debate of any question of a public nature. And I just think that's the kind of broad definition that we need at the present time. Amendment 13 also seeks to clarify when steps are not reasonably practicable, i.e. avoids the excuses given that often we try to be reasonably practical, and instead makes free speech a default position and just means that we're not just paying lip service to it. I think why this is important is because we do have to remember that in the 1986 Education Act, there was a clear duty to free speech, academic freedom, and so on. But as other noble lords have mentioned, it might already be in the law, and yet the situation has deteriorated. So in that sense, I'm looking to bolster and improve or strengthen the free speech aspects of the law, not just to repeat them with threats, which is sometimes the way some people talk about the bill. I think that the fact that those censorious trends have carried on despite the 1986 Education Act's commitment to academic freedom is because universities generally argue when controversies arise that they are balancing academic freedom against other increasingly onerous statutory duties and also institutional values. And one of the excuses that is given is avoiding harassment, which is why I'm rather concerned about Baroness Bennis of Manor Castle's amendment, because I have found recently harassment to be a weasel word. Any word we think we know what it means anymore, you discover it's often not quite as previously. It's also why I support Amendment 28, because I've put my name to this, as it aims to provide an enhanced sense of freedom of speech again, but also, and this is key, it clarifies the relationship between free speech on campus and other legal duties. The Equality Act 2010 specifies that universities must prevent harassment directed at members of their community who have protected characteristics. Now, the section 26(4) of the Equalities Act, in which this harassment part is mentioned, is reasonably clear and caveated. It's not just a kind of blanket, any harassment, anyone can say harassment, but because harassment is defined partially by the perception of the victim, it becomes problematic for us. We've seen over recent years that universities are often overzealous in integrating or interpreting their responsibilities under the Equalities Act, stressing this subjective perception of complaints and ignoring other tests in the Equalities Act. So that's resulted in, just to use a couple of examples, the no platforming of visiting speakers such as Professor Joe Phoenix and Rosa Friedman at the University of Essex, when it was claimed by trans activists that allowing them to speak itself would constitute harassment of trans students and staff, and the university authorities accepted that. They've since had apologies, but that's not the point I'm making. This harassment excuse, I think, has added to a climate that morally devalues free speech by suggesting that free speech itself is harmful, that free speech can be the harassment, and I think especially to identity groups. And I suppose that gets me into the bulk of what has been discussed already about how we define free speech, because constantly free speech at the moment is maligned as nothing more than hate speech. This is a constant thing that's said to me, oh, you support free speech, that's because you want the excuse to have hate speech. And what's your attitude to hate speech? But I'm concerned that hate speech is also ill-defined and too often amounts to little more than speech that we hate. I think we maybe have to bite the bullet in our definitions here and recognise that there's a huge range of ideas that can be and are silenced as hateful. And if we take but even if we take hate speech at face value, something that maybe most of us would agree was hateful, like racist speech or bigoted views of whatever, I think that as a free speecher, and I think this is true in academic circles as well, we do have to defend views that we don't like, views that we consider to be bigoted, and we might then have an argument about which of those views are bigoted or hateful. And I think that's especially important in a university context, because that's where we think that we have the seat of debating, debunking, demolishing false ideas. That's the whole purpose in some ways, or one of the key purposes of universities in and of itself. Indeed, one of the reasons why I worry about the Noble Lord, Lord Collins' Amendment 3 that claims that freedom of speech should not include freedom to espouse Holocaust denial, and this is an awkward thing to talk about, is also actually in Amendment 28, which I've got my name to, but I feel queasy about it, is I suppose I want to just probe why we would make Holocaust denial a kind of special case. I mean, I understand that the Holocaust is a special case. We all understand the Holocaust denial is abhorrent and monstrous and part of the vile anti-Semitic playbook, and needs to be, of course, at every opportunity challenged. But it's not illegal in the United Kingdom. And so I just wonder whether it's appropriate to use legislation here to make this one named exception, because I do think that it might give a green light to other speech being said, well, if that can be exempt from the academic freedom, then why can't this particular hate speech be banned, or this particular hate speech be banned, even if it's legal? And I feel it's rather defensive, a kind of disingenuous strand of argument there's a disingenuous strand of argument that says that this bill will allow Holocaust denial, as though that's just what the nation's students and academics are just waiting for this bill to pass so they can all rush out to deny the Holocaust. But actually, I think it just confuses what's really at stake here. Just a couple of other things. I wanted to just say that I've got every sympathy for Lord Hunt and Baroness Morris's Amendment 25 on the heckler's veto. But I suppose I just feel that in a bill that's meant to increase students' right to speak their mind, that it might seem a bit of a problem to hint at restricting students' freedom to speak, even if it is to shout loud slogans. I'm genuinely torn on this, but I just feel that is the wrong thing to do, and it gives the impression that only certain people are allowed to speak. So I'm not keen on that. On the Noble Lord Hunt's general point at the beginning that he made, I just wanted to reflect quickly on that, which is I myself have needed to be convinced that we need this bill at all, because I actually think it's a much deeper problem of cultural change, and I worry that people will think that this bill will be enough, a legalistic tick box exercise. The way I look at it is this, that actually, of course, this bill is not a silver bullet. But already this bill has created quite a big debate in universities, and that's quite important. I'm not keen on using legislation for kind of messaging purposes. I mean, it has to be more than that. And I do think that we just need more speech, on universities. I was delighted that there's this initiative at Cambridge University tomorrow night with Living Freedom and the Free Speech Champions and professors at Cambridge. Arif Ahmed's already been mentioned, and Alistair Donald from Living Freedom, where they're putting on a series of seminars on John Locke, on John Milton and liberty and conscience, and trying to actually have a proactive attitude. And I'm all for that. But what I just say to the Noble Lord, Lord Hunt, and other people who are sceptical, is that that is necessary. But I do think that this bill is the bottom line. And I think that the more that we can clarify through this bill that free speech is under attack, and that the law won't allow people to be penalised for speaking out in terms of academic freedom, the better. But we do probably have to clarify what we mean by free speech before it would work.